You're listening to Widowed AF with
Rosie Gilmoss
and Lucinda Boast.
We've invited some members of the world's most exclusive club to bravely share their stories.
Join us for some honest conversations about living a different life, the crushing lows, the surprising highs, and everything in between.
Please note this is a podcast about death. Carefully read the episode descriptions and be kind to yourself.
But for now, welcome to our podcast.
Let's begin. Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. We are joined today with Sarah Hurst from Bromley. Hello, Sarah.
Yeah.
Welcome to Widowed AF. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So your husband, Steve, he went for what I assume was a fairly routine appointment for his diabetes. And whilst at that appointment, he got a really devastating diagnosis, didn't he? Are you able to tell us your story, please, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. So Steve had been diagnosed type 2 diabetic, and as part of that whole process, he would have regular organ scans to make sure that he wasn't getting any side effects. And he'd handled the diabetic diagnosis well, and he'd changed his diet and he'd stopped drinking. And they had been monitoring his liver because there had been signs of like fatty tissue building up. And so they wanted to sign him off of having to have as many routine scans. And so he'd gone for a scan on my 40th birthday, actually. And we assumed that was that. And then in between Christmas and New Year, he had a phone call asking him to go just to talk through some of the results of the scan, which we assumed was either you're going to have to keep having them for a little while or they can be less frequent. And the appointment came up for New Year's Eve. And that made me feel a little bit jumpy, because why would you go for an appointment on New Year's Eve? And so off he went, and I didn't go with him because we didn't really think anything of it. And he texted me from the train on the way home and he said, "It's bad." And I was like, oh no, he's going to have to keep having the scans, or maybe there's more damage that he wasn't anticipating. And I was home with the kids. At the time, they were 10, 8 and 5. Our youngest had just started reception that September. And I was in the sort of playroom with the youngest on my lap, and over the top of his head, we were having this conversation, and it was suddenly like, it's cancer, which I wasn't anticipating. And you just assume, oh, chemo, treatment. And then he said, there's absolutely nothing they can do. And he had gone in, like we were ending 2018, assuming that we were moving into this like different stage of parenting with all the children at school. And I'd just gone back to work and all that. And then suddenly it was like everything was different and there was no hope, sort of thing. And we were having the conversation over this small child's head, which was ridiculous, but it was New Year's Eve. And so we went to my friend's party because we didn't like, do you not go? Do you? And so we went to the party and we just pretended everything was normal. And his diagnosis was that because of the position of the tumour, there was absolutely nothing they could do. Ordinarily, they probably would have tried surgery, but it was on the artery that went into the liver. And so there was absolutely nothing they could do. And it was like, oh my goodness. And so sort of like 2018 finished and 2019 started, and I didn't know what my life was going to look like anymore.
New Year's can be so, symbolic in so many ways. But, for most people, they symbolise hope and optimism. And for you get dealt this absolutely devastating blow. And then you go to the party that you were invited to, because that's the sort of weird stuff we do when we get given devastating news.
And I think it was suddenly like, this is probably going to be his last one. And so I don't want to sit in crying. I want to give the children something to remember. And we were going to friends who we quite often spent time with, whose children were similar age. And that was going to be our thing, like New Year was going to be our thing. And I wanted to still have that just once in a way. So we went. And we didn't tell the children like immediately, because I wanted to be able to answer questions and I didn't know what the answers were. So we sort of held off for a week, and then you just walk around in this sort of weird bubble of, I know something that's going to blow everyone else's world up.
Did you tell the friends that you were with on New Year's Eve, or did you just... Oh, so you just kind of plastered on this mask
Yeah.
and powered through.
Yeah.
Gosh, that would have been very difficult.
Yeah, I think we hadn't had time to process it as a couple. We sort of had to make a snap decision. He got home about 4:00 in the afternoon, and it was very much like, we haven't decided how we want to talk about it. And so we didn't until we got home, put the kids to bed midnight.
That is obviously the very sensible and measured approach. However, I know that I would have been unable to, I would have blurted it out.
Moment of like, it's almost like an out of body experience. You're kind of like watching yourself do things as part of our journey, but it's that, so you just function.
Yeah, that's another quite common theme, actually, isn't it? That sort of almost watching yourself. I referred to it as being like I was on Broadchurch, because I felt that sort of horrible, bleak drama kind of feeling. So you said that obviously you didn't tell the children straight away, and they were 10, 8 and 5 at the time, weren't they? So obviously the 5-year-old, I mean, it's a tricky one because of their age, because they, you know, as we now know, they don't process things very well. But the 10-year-old and 8-year-old, they would have been much more able to process what was happening. So how on earth did you tell them?
So we let them go back to school after the Christmas, and we had spoken to some nurses at Macmillan and the consultant, and we had a bit of a clearer idea of what the early journey and then the end was going to look like. And so we sat them down after school on a Friday to give them the weekend. I had gone into the school the Friday morning and said, I'm telling my children this today. Can you tell all the staff like today by after school so that you're ready for them on Monday? And then, yeah, we sat them down after school on Friday, and we just said to them, Daddy's been to the doctor. They have found this. It is cancer. It is in his liver. This is what it's going to do to his liver. And there is no medicine they can give Daddy that will help. And so this is what is going to happen. Daddy will die.
Oh my God. Oh, Sarah, that's just awful.
The difficulty was that you're in this moment, and I think probably anyone who has gone through it like a terminal illness journey, all the time up till then, our marriage had been so strong. And so like we were a unit, we were one, we did everything together. Our end goal was always the same. So even if only one of us was going through something, it affected the family. So you're like a tight unit. And then suddenly it was like our destinations are not the same. And it was sort of almost in that moment, my children handled it all very differently. And that's also a challenge, as you'll probably know, with like 3 children also. They don't handle it the same. I mean, having 3 children anyway, like a sticker chart with one, and then you're like, I know what I'm doing now. And then the next one's like, I don't want your stickers. So it's that they're so different. You can never really learn parenting because someone's going to be like, work twice, not 3 times. Don't be a muppet. And so there's like that thing with kids is that they handle it differently depending on their age, depending on their character, depending on their relationship with the person. And so we were sat there, we've got like a corner couch. We were sat there, and my youngest had listened, and he said, I don't want that, and went straight back to his tablet. And my daughter just started shouting. She was furious. She was 8, furious. You're supposed to walk me down the aisle. You're supposed to be going there to my babies. She was so angry. And then my eldest, who was extremely close to his dad, they were like peas in a pod. You could just sort of see his heart breaking and his whole self going in on himself. And Steve was obviously like sobbing. And I was like, I don't know how to carry all these people. And that's my job now, is that I've somehow got to navigate this, because he's dying, they're picking, and there's only me to deal with it. And all the time up till then, it had been like, well, we're all going to be together in this. And suddenly it was like, oh my gosh, not anymore. And I think that was a real challenge, in that suddenly, like, what he was going through was horrendous, obviously, because he was dying. But you're also like, I'm not going to the same place. Like, I can't help you because I don't know what it means to be dying, but you can't help me because you don't know what it means to be left.
Yeah. And there's almost, you know, that often I felt an anger. I was so cross with him for leaving me to deal with this shit. But hearing, oh God, I'm actually,
you can't, it's almost like you can't be cross because they're dying, but you're losing them incrementally. And you're just like left there in like the remnants of
your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we've used the term cancer adjacent because whilst you are caring for and supporting the person that you love through this horrifying illness, you just have to kind of suck it up and keep going and keep moving on. And actually, you become very, very fragile in that process. And it's really important that you get looked after too. And but then you have 3 children even after
And
he died.
I just think also as parents, we never prioritise ourselves, really, do we? Well, we don't. We learn to do it better, I think. And when you're on your own, you have to learn to do it better. But it's not something that we naturally do. We will naturally always be like, but the children need this and the children need that. And he's needs this. And I think that we only got 4 months in the end, which in some ways was horrendous. And in some ways, having seen friends since go through much longer cancer journeys, I think was a blessing.
You know what? I've read your application, and because it's a different year from the diagnosis is 2018, and then he died in 2019. I stupidly sort of thought, oh, a year and 4 months, but of course, no, it's not 4 months. So that's, and these children, they went from, not dad being, having diabetes, which is a very manageable condition, to it wasn't. I use very inverted commas here when I say just a cancer diagnosis. It was a terminal cancer diagnosis.
And they offered chemotherapy, but which they anticipated would buy him 12 to 18 months. I mean, he was very for that. And I was a little bit not for it. Like I wanted him to have the time, but I also had, what chemotherapy does to people and that you're the one picking up that. And so I wanted to know how ill he would be with it, how angry, what the steroids would do, how sick he would be. And so he'd gone for a biopsy to determine which of the daily chemos would work best for him. And the problem with the liver is it's extremely vascular. And so again, they said, simple outpatient, come and pick him up about 3 o'clock. So I took the kid, he went off by himself. I took the kids to school, work from home. And then they rang me at lunchtime and he had bled out during the biopsy because they'd nicked an artery because it's so vascular on the liver. And that in the end put pay to it. We never had to have a chemotherapy discussion because his liver never recovered and well enough following the biopsy to have anything.
So even that option was taken away from you. But it feels like during this whole process, it was all just all this information and these kind of awful pieces of information are being given to you. And it's all so out of your control and so quick.
It did feel like I was just getting my head around so he had cancer. And then it was like, and now he's in ICU following the biopsy. And he was in ICU for about 4 days, in hospital for just over a week. And then he couldn't eat and he couldn't this and he couldn't that. And you're like, I wasn't ready for this bit. Like you told us we had a year and this has been a week. And they don't know. They do their very best to tell you as much as they know, but they don't know.
No. And so obviously you really didn't have very long with him before he ultimately died. No. Did he die in a hospice or was he at home?
He was we talked a lot. I think one of the gifts of cancer is that you have the opportunity to talk and you can't really have control over the decisions any more than when you have a baby. You have control over your birth plan, but you can have considered things. And he did not want to die at home because he did not want the children to have a memory of his dead body being in the house. He was very child focused, as like being a dad was everything to him. It's all he'd ever wanted. He was a little bit older when we had the kids. And so he was very like, what's best for them? How are they going to navigate this? And for him, he didn't want them having the memory of like, coming in. What if they needed me in the night and they were scared to come in because daddy's dead body was in that room? Like he didn't want that. So he wanted to die in hospice. The challenge then is hospice places are so overstretched and you don't just get to be like, I'd like to go to hospice now. It's like you have to wait for there to be a hospice place and you have to wait for that to be available. And palliative care, they're amazing. Like they're like angels, but they don't always have availability. And we were lucky in a way that he was fine and he was doing okay. With liver cancer, you're basically dying of liver failure. So when he was ill, he was ill quickly and the decline is quick. And so he was well for quite a lot of the 4 months. I would say 3 of the 4, once he recovered from the ICU stay, he was back at work. There were places he wanted to take the children and we couldn't go much out of the country because you can't get travel insurance. But we went to Copenhagen, which is a place we went to for our 10th anniversary, and he had always wanted to take the children. And so we quickly booked the flights and we did it. And that was terrifying because he was iller when we went than when we booked it. And I was like, how am I going to do this? What if this? But we did it, and we did lots of things that he wanted to do, which was great. And when he got sick, he was really quite ill, and I had to wait for a place to be available for him to go in. And the day he went into the hospice, we'd had a lot of conversations the week leading up to it, because when your liver's not working, all the toxins that it would have been removing from your body are now in your body. So you itch all the time. He scratched all the time, all night long. And you go yellow, obviously, like with jaundice. Probably most people have seen that. And his eyeballs were like bright yellow, and little things like that. But also it starts deteriorating your brain. And so he was finding it harder and harder to remember words, to recall things. And obviously with the pain, we were administering morphine at home, and he was sleeping a lot, and he'd have like a little bit of good time every day, but not a lot. And we were trying to like protect that for the children so they could have a bedtime story with daddy, and people would want to see him. And I would say no, because he doesn't have enough good time for it to be freely available anymore. And he had a not great weekend, and it got to the point where I wasn't comfortable leaving him anymore. So I needed to take the boys to the barbers because they looked like bush people, and I had to get a friend to come and sit with him. And then one of my kids had a birthday party, and so my mum had to come in and just be in the house because it wasn't he would like forget that he was weak and try and do things that he couldn't really do the stairs, and he'd forget because his brain was becoming affected. And the morning he went into hospice, we had all these conversations about, I think we need to call them. And I guess for him, he knew that once he left that house, that was the last time he was doing it. And it was what he wanted to go to hospice. But then when it comes down to it, how do you be the person that's like, yeah, I'm going to leave now? Because that's not what he wanted to do. And the morning that he went in, when I'd gone in to do his 3 o'clock morphine, he'd been asleep, and he wasn't often asleep for that long. I was like, oh, brilliant, he's getting rest. We might have a good day tomorrow. I went in to do a 6 o'clock morphine, and he was sitting up, which wasn't like him. And he turned around and he had no idea who I was. And you could see in his eyes that he was like scared of what I wanted. And he just didn't know who I was. And I was like, oh, what do I do now then? Because my parents had to come take the children to school, and I said to them, like, you need to say goodbye to daddy, because daddy's feeling so poorly that when you come home, he won't be here. He has to go and get more medicine to help him to rest. And then I rang the hospice. I thought, you've got to get him out by 3:20.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't know who we are. He's scared. And bless them, they got an ambulance. And so in a way, all of the choices kept getting taken away, which in some ways is kinder. Like, it wasn't. That was the worst day of my life when he didn't know who I was. But in some ways it's kinder because he didn't have to be, yeah, I'm sick enough to go. He just really, really was sick enough that he had to leave.
Yeah, you can hear that actually, because I don't know whether you heard our episode. We spoke to a lady whose husband went to Dignitas because he had such a degenerative illness, and having to take that step, for the plane, then into Dignitas. And I guess for Steve, it would have been that taking the step to leave his home and shutting the door behind him.
It was like, I'm going to leave you with the children now. And I think in his brain, he knew that he did not want them to have difficult memories. But then to get to the point where you're just like, yeah, I'm walking away now, which wasn't what he was doing, but also was what he was doing.
I think actually that speaks volumes about him as a man. Sarah, how long was he in the hospice?
He went in on the Tuesday morning, and he died overnight between Wednesday and Thursday.
He was ready, wasn't he?
He was ready. And once he was in hospice, I told him he could go. And I think I've had this conversation repeatedly with people who have lost people to terminal illness. And I think you do get to the point where it's better for all of you, even though it's the last thing that you want, because it isn't life anymore. They're not the person you were married to. They can't be that person. Their whole life is pain and discomfort and agony and medication. And yeah, I told him he could go. I said, I love you. We will be fine. I will look after them, but you can go now. Like, you did good. I was like, you were everything to us, but you can go now. And I think that's, again, quite a common thing for people who lose to hospice, especially, because you can't let them keep going like that. And I think for me, that in a way that gave me peace, because it's almost like we've made that decision.
Yeah. And I know it's a conversation actually that John and I have had, more than once, as you may imagine, because his first wife died from cancer and my husband died very suddenly. And it is that it's one worse than the other, because you get to say goodbye, but you have to watch them suffer. That's the price you pay for being able to say goodbye.
Each of them comes with such different trauma that all you can do is go, there's no good way for this to happen. Things that I'm glad I got to say to him that would have been sad to not to, but to watch him like that and lose himself, and to be married to somebody who can't be the husband that he wants to be, and that you kind of want them to be that person. Like, they look like themselves. Well, not really, but sort of. They're just not. They're not. And you start losing them from that moment, and your paths diverge from that moment of, you're going to die, you've got to stay.
And you must, I mean, we all feel very lonely. We all do. But getting that call, going to the hospice, and then coming home to your house.
He hadn't initially wanted the children to see him when he was like sedated, that he thought that would upset them. And when he got to the hospice, he was very distressed. Obviously, he had no clue what's going on. Like, he'd gone, really. Like, I often say to people, the day he theoretically died isn't the day I lost him. I lost him when he didn't know who I was. Like, he'd gone. He had gone. And so the hospice said to me, do you want us to sedate him, because he'll be more comfortable, but it will mean he won't wake up? And I was like, yes, please do that. And you know what they're saying to you, and you know that they're going to ease it out. And I came home and I said to the children, did they want to go that day on a Tuesday? And it was all a bit much for them, and so they didn't. And then Wednesday I went in, I did the school run, because he really wanted things to be as normal for the children. And also, you don't know how long it's going to be. Like, sometimes I was like, I wish I would have just pulled them out of school in the January, because it was only a term. We could have done this, we could have done that, but also it could have been a year and a half. You don't know. So you're making all these choices with the knowledge you have at the best of your ability. And we didn't know how long they said, oh, we think it's days. Like, it's not going to be weeks. We think it's days. And so I said to them, they went to school. They were better in school. The routine helped them to function.
Yeah.
And I said to them, do you want to go after school? And the boys didn't. So my youngest and oldest, a boy, is a girl in the middle, and my daughter did. And so I took her, and she was hilarious, and she was reading the menu, and she was telling him, if you could eat, Daddy, this is what you would have to eat. Oh, it's a mess. That's her favourite. She was watching out the window. There were people playing tennis in the tennis courts over the road. She was telling him who was winning. She was commentating the whole thing. This is the child who, I live in South London, who literally from Hastings to London talked the whole way without taking breaths. So that's her MO.
I've got one of those. In fact, no, I got two of those.
Yeah. So that's what she just talked to him, and it was very natural. And she said, can I try out your walker? Because you're never going to use it. And she did that. And it was very natural. And I think if he could hear, he probably loved it, because she was just in her element. And she gave him a kiss, and she was like, I'm hungry now, Dad. I'm going to go home for my tea. And a friend had called to say he was on his way home from work, and he'd pop in if I wanted to go home and put the kids to bed, which I did. And then I rang and I said, how's he doing? They said, oh, he's settled. You can come back if you want. And I didn't, because I knew that really what he would want. I mean, he had said, I don't want you in there. I want you at home with the children. And so I put them to bed, and it was a bit late by the time they were all asleep. I thought, it's like 10 o'clock. I don't really feel like driving back in. And at 12:30, they rang me. And if someone's ringing you at 12:30, what that is. I went in at 1 and sat with him, and then came back, went to bed, and had to tell them in the morning.
How did they take it? Because I guess it's a little bit different from our experience in that they knew that it was very imminent, but obviously that's still, particularly for a child, it's still going to be devastating. And
it was a sticking in process for them, to be honest, because obviously they were expecting it. My eldest was upset because he had said to me on the Wednesday, I'll go tomorrow to see him. And I said, I can't promise you that you can do that. If you want to see him in hospice, you're probably you need to go today. And he said, I'll go tomorrow. And I said, I need you to repeat back to me that you understand that you'll go tomorrow if he's still alive, because it's possible that you can't do that. I'm not making that a promise. He's like,
Mm.
I do understand. I'm not in a place that I can do that today. And I said, that's fine. And then obviously I had to wake him up and he'd gone. And he felt like he hadn't said goodbye. And he was not upset with himself because he knew he'd made the right decision for himself in that moment, that he didn't want to do it. And he said, does that mean I can't ever say goodbye to Daddy again? And I said, no, you can, but he is dead. And Steve had been very clear that he didn't really want them to see his body. He didn't really want the coffin at the funeral. He didn't want them. He had a lot of memories from when he was younger, and he lost his dad at 17. So he had a lot of theories on, like, I don't want them having this. I don't want them kissing my body. I don't want them he'd been like asked to kiss dead grandparents, and he was like,
Ooh.
don't want that. None of that. Don't want them seeing the body. But my eldest wanted to. He wanted to go say goodbye to his dad. And so I overruled his dead father and I let him go.
Well, actually, my eldest, he was 7 at the point that his dad died, but he was 8 by the time I held the memorial, and he very much wanted to speak at it. I mean, I feel it's a funny one, isn't it? Because if I'd had a coffin there, would I have had the kids there? I don't know, because it was different, I suppose, because the body wasn't there. And he very much wanted to speak, and people said to me, no, that's far too much pressure for him. And you know what he did? He stood up and he read this lovely little letter, very cute letter to his dad. And I think for him, now he is nearly 13 and he's able to think back on that time, I think it gives him some degree of comfort. And I think they are old enough at 10, they are old enough to make these decisions. And you have to give them a little bit of autonomy in this situation, because they will feel more out of control than we do,
They've had all their agency stripped away from them. They didn't ask for it. It's like they're totally out of control. Their world doesn't make sense and it's never going back. And he wanted to say goodbye to his dad. And again, that's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But he got in and he held his hand and he climbed into bed with him and he hugged him and he told him the things that he wished he would have been able to say. And we sat with him for about 45 minutes. The hospice does it amazingly. I mean, when we got there, she was like, we just need to wait before you take down the body because his son's coming. I was like, that small child next to me, that's who you're waiting for. And then she was like, you're just going to need to give me a moment, went out, composed herself, came back in, took us down. And yeah, it was important to him and he needed that. And I think you have to let them walk their grief journey. Like, I would love to have been like, right, this has happened. You all go in counselling, you all get help, but they need to have the autonomy to be able to make it work. I wouldn't want someone telling me how to grieve. People have done it. It does not go down well. We have to find our own way. And that's the thing with grief. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't look the same for me as someone else who's had a similar cancer journey. It doesn't look the same for any 3 of my children. They've all done it very differently. Different things trigger them. They respond to things differently. When they're sad, it looks different. And you just learn on the job to let them play it out.
So, Sarah, this idea as well of, not knowing whether you're doing it right, not knowing whether it's the right thing to do, people having an opinion, because some people thought, you shouldn't have, a child should not see a dead body, presumably. And other people would say, well, it's their choice. But you feel, don't you, when you're a widow or a widower, you feel like you're very public property and everybody seems to have an opinion on how you choose to live your life, how you choose to raise your children, even, down to what song you have at their funeral or their memorial. But I gathered from your blog, actually, that you have experienced some of this. And I wondered if you would elaborate a little bit on that while you're here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think becoming a widow is actually quite infantilizing because people suddenly start treating you like you're 12 years old. And there are times when you feel like it because I don't know, if you have to fill in a next of kin, you have to put your mum.
Yes.
Minor surgery. They're like, who's your next of kin? And I was like, it's my mum. But it's not because I had a husband. I felt I overshared with this poor receptionist because I was like, I did have a husband. I wasn't like, but I am not, it's not my fault. And there is that, you feel like, I don't know, people feel like you can't do something because you're carrying around this grief that firstly, they don't really want to help you, but also they think you're helpless. And I think with the children, they lose agency, but also you lose some agency. Like, I'm still a grown-up. I actually do everything. But I am capable. I can YouTube how to do a tie and how to refill the boiler, and that is what I've done. And you learn a lot. But yeah, I think I took my children. So Steve died overnight between Wednesday and Thursday. On Friday, I took them to soft play because I had sat indoors with them all day on the Thursday, telling people that he was dead and doing admin and blah, 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 ringing everybody. And then they started bouncing on the sofa and it was a new sofa. And I was like, absolutely.
We got to get out.
And I was like, it's not soft play. And they were like, oh, can we go soft play tomorrow? And I was like, do you know what, you can. I knew in the soft play, I said, oh, is it an insect? I said, oh no, their dad died yesterday. And like, you know, when you're like, I sound like an absolute psychopath, but it's what they needed. And it was from that moment I was like, it's not the done thing until someone's done it. And now it's the done thing. And they're like, oh.
That's sorry, I've got to interrupt you there, because you've just taken me back to a memory I had completely forgotten. And I'm sitting in the ball pit with my baby while the boys played around me. And I can remember the sort of the nudges and the whispers because it had been in the local paper. And I just remember that was the first point at which I realised just what public property I now was. And obviously, there was new things for people to talk about. But yeah, it was soft play. And I think I was the same as you. I think I was losing my mind in my own four walls.
Yeah.
And I thought, do you know what? Fuck it. And the very nice people who ran the soft play had given me a year's free membership. Isn't that fun?
That's lovely.
I'd forgotten that until that moment as well.
So helpful. How can I help? Give me free membership to soft
play. Yes. But yeah, you sort of venture out and then you're like, oh God,
okay.
I'm out in the world.
And my kids went back to school really early as well. And we all know that we wouldn't have done that if they didn't need it. We wouldn't have done that if it's not the right thing for them. But then everyone's looking at you in the playground, and the school were brilliant. They were like, if you want to drop them early or late, so you don't have to do the gauntlet. And I was like, I don't mind. Like, I'm not uncomfortable. I know my presence makes other people feel uncomfortable, but that's very much on them rather than me. I think that's something you have to. I've always been a bit of that sort of person, if I'm perfectly honest with you. But I think you do have to become, you're walking in, you're reminding people. Bad things happen to good people. You're reminding people, like, people die. Things don't always work out. Happily ever after isn't always forever. And you do sort of feel that, like, I'm making you uncomfortable. You're asking me how I am. You are willing me not to answer. And there is that where you become a little bit, like, tough-skinned about it, because people tell you, like, oh, you didn't really cry at the funeral. Well, no, that's not really where I was going to cry. It was a massive memorial. My 3 children were there. My daughter was speaking, and they had planned it. So we didn't call it a funeral. Then we called it a celebration of Daddy's life. And we had balloons, and they refused to have flowers because flowers made them sad. Why does everyone keep bringing flowers? And my neighbours, bless them, were so good. I would just turn up and be like, someone else has sent flowers. Can you just take them? The kids don't want them in the house.
I sent my dad with mine to the old people's home because, again, and I felt very ungrateful because people do the only thing that they feel they can do. Yeah. But let's be honest, you're going to just watch some flowers die. And quite frankly, I
don't want any more dead things.
No. And it's fucking lilies, man.
The smell of lilies. I remember my mother-in-law said to me after John died and we were planning his funeral, and she said she was big on flowers, but flowers do just make you sad, right? And she said, You get the arrangement for the top of the coffin. I just looked at her and I said, I don't want to decorate his coffin. He doesn't deserve fucking flowers. He wouldn't want flowers. He'd tell me to spend the 50 quid on something else.
You know what? It's so interesting and the money of the whole funeral thing. So obviously we had talked a little bit about it, and Steve said to me, if you get the bereavement support, don't spend it on the funeral because you can get the 3,500 payment. He went, spend it on flights. And so I did. I spent it on flights. He had the cheapest funeral, and everyone was like, is he having cars? Are you doing this? I was like, no, I'm not even there, because you have to pay extra to be there, don't you? And he didn't want the children at the creme, and I didn't want to leave them at that point, so I went to the creme. So he was very much, I like to see it. In the end, he was cremated at the same time we were holding the celebration of life, which was like a coincidence rather than anything planned, because you don't choose the time. And I said he slipped out of his own party.
That's interesting that you also had a celebration of life. I refused to call mine a celebration of life. I was still in a very dark place. So it's a funeral and you must wear black. But you had it without a body as well. Yeah. I also spent my bereavement payment on flights to Cape Verde, and I took the children to spend Christmas there. And I even remember somebody saying to me, it wasn't somebody I knew very well, but they sort of looked at me with a bit of distaste and went, oh, well, I'm sure the taxpayers are thrilled. It's not taxpayers' money, it's the national insurance contributions that the late partner made. So I could wang on about that a bit more, but that's probably an episode different. But it's just, again, it's like, how dare you judge what I do with that? I didn't take the money directly out of your bloody pocket. Sarah, thank you so much. Can I just ask you, I do like to ask before they go, what life looks like for you and the children now?
So we're nearly 4 years beyond. It hasn't been a great 4 years. It was very difficult going through lockdown. because
yeah.
I just started to rebuild, and suddenly all the support that I had found got totally taken away from us. I did 90 days without seeing an adult, and that was a long 90 days because his anniversary. So all our flashback moments fell during that lockdown one. That was really hard. And to be honest, I think that coming so soon after, I mean, 2019 for us was a car crash year because it started badly and then just got consistently worse. And then 2020 coming so soon after that was difficult for the children because you couldn't make them promises of, yes, you're going to go back to school and this is going to happen and this is what the world's going to look like after this. And they already knew that the world changed and then never went back to normal, that they recognized what normal looked like. And so that set them back quite a lot with how they were processing things. So yeah, the first couple of years were horrendous. I think we've rebuilt. Like, it's survival, isn't it? Like, and you get to the point where you just have to get on with it. And
It's a choice, isn't it? It's a choice.
Like, I think we roll with the punches. Would I want this for myself? No. Do I still think this sort of thing happens to somebody else, not me? Yes, absolutely. Like, I have days where I'm just like, this is not my life. This is ridiculous. Like, absolutely not. But I don't hate waking up anymore. And I think I don't hate that. I don't mind waking up. I don't dread the weekends because that's a weekend of just me and the children and it's exhausting. You know, I went on the dating apps and that's an experience.
That was going to be my next question, Sarah.
And I don't know. My plan A would always be us together as a family. Like, I can't have that. And so you have to make a plan B or a plan C or a plan Q and just wing it. And I think we're very much in the winging stage. I am not delighted to be parenting teens by myself.
No. I'm not delighted to be parenting them with help, mate.
Like, what is that? What is that? And I do, there are days when I'm like, that was the best point of my life. Like, we were married for 10 years. We had the children during that time. I had that really good 10 years. Someone once said to me, at least you had amazing 10 years. He loved you so much. And I'm like, don't talk. Wind that back. I appreciate that you're speaking to me, but no.
You find that would have been really kind of inflammatory at the time, but actually now you are able to take comfort because it's funny you say that, but I was, you know, obviously all marriages have their ups and their downs and you know, Ben and I were very happily married and I can remember saying to my mum, you know, very soon towards the end, how, God, I can't believe how happy I am and how perfect my life is. I mean, you can give yourself a little kick in the teeth.
Why did you say that?
I know. I'm sorry. I know. It is actually my fault. I try not to say anything positive now, just in case. But I felt I did take comfort from that. I took comfort from the fact that I had acknowledged that I was lucky and I had acknowledged that I was happy. I was aware of it because I do think all of us can be guilty of sort of stumbling through life with our eyes half open. And we were very much in the blur of, you know, a newborn. And actually, you know, had it happened a few months earlier when we were still in the real cold phase of newborn, then, you know, I maybe wouldn't have had such a perfect, lovely memory to look back on. And so I do take comfort from it now. But I have to say, yes, if somebody had said to me at the time, I had 14 years, I would have. Yeah.
We were happy. And I mean, the older two have some amazing memories of their dad. My younger one has struggled because he doesn't have memories that he remembers are his memories. And that's something I'm working on with him. No, like, and I will be happy again. It looks different, but I'm different. And I think I remember quite early on, a friend said to me, I really missed you. And what she meant was like, you haven't been able to come out because you haven't got a babysitter. And the children needed it to me putting them to bed. There are things you sacrifice for yourself and I was like, just leave the kids. You need, and no, they need, you know, at that point, they needed it to be me. I miss you. And I said to her, do you know what though? I miss me. And I don't think I'm coming back. And so it's a journey to being like, okay, well, who am I going to be now? And I have written about it because we went to see Frozen 2 and there's the song, The Next Right Thing. And it was only about 6 months in, but my daughter was an original Frozen girl, Elsa dress, all of it. And so she's like, can we go and see it just for old time? So we went on opening night and I made the boys go, which obviously the then 12-year-old was thrilled with. And I ugly cried through The Next Right Thing song. I ugly cried. And they were like, this is why we do the cinema with you. Really resonated for me because it was like, I can't really look to the future and everything hurts too much, but I can do the next thing. And I think that sort of became a bit of a mantra where what is the next right thing for me to do, to feel like myself, to feel like I'm being the best mum I can be, to feel like I'm honouring him, to feel like me again, because I'm rebuilding here, because I've been with him since, well, we were best friends to start with, that sort of became more. And I met him when I was 22 and I was 40 when he died. So that was like, I hadn't really adulted without him as a friend. I'm picking myself. I felt like I was a bit of knitting. It was like we've been knitted together and then I've got drop stitches everywhere and it's just going to take me time to figure out. And yeah, like I'm dating somebody new. It's never going to be a blended thing because I don't think that's where my kids are at right now. I have time, a bit more time for myself. My children can be now left with a babysitter. I'm somehow parenting someone who's doing GCSE options and he goes to school and he's in school and all of them are in school and they're doing okay and they have friends and it's all right. Like,
Eldest year 8.
he's year 9.
Yeah, because I've got one in year 8, so I was trying to figure out the
Boy,
days.
what a time to be alive.
Oh, I know. It makes you feel ancient, doesn't it? Especially when you go to parents' evening and the teachers all look, you know, like
They're
you
like
genuinely
12, aren't they? Yeah.
Oh, Sarah, do you know what? You have been a really, really wonderful guest because you have told us in such lovely kind of eloquent words how much you love Stephen and how impactful this loss has been on all of you. But you've also you've ended with a sort of message of hope, actually, which is this message that we believe so strongly in, which is that you have to choose to rebuild yourself and you have to make time to do it. And it doesn't happen instantly. It can take years, but it's worth it, isn't it? It's worth the fight.
There's one image that I saw that's really struck with me, and I use this a lot to people who've been newly widowed, because in a way, I've found myself a collector of people who have dead people. So that's
oh yeah, me too.
people, absolutely. Like the Blitz, you know, like when they used to have terraced houses, and then like, a bomb would have dropped on one of them, and it's so you've got this lovely terrace, and then just a big pile of rubble in the middle. And I kind of feel it's like that. It's like the other people on the street, they'll come and they'll move the bricks and find your bed and help you make the bed, and they're like, I've done everything I can because I found your bed. And so, like, you've got a bed to sleep in, but then they go home and they shut their doors and sleep under their roof. And you're like, I still don't have doors or a roof, and there's still bricks everywhere. And I am sat on a nice bed that people who love me have helped me make, but I don't know what I'm doing. And this is not a house by any stretch of imagination. And it takes time to rebuild a house. And for a while, you do just have to sit in the rubble and go, that's a lot of rubble. But I acknowledge it, and I'm going to sit in it, and I'm going to wear it, and I'm going to be like, no, I haven't washed my clothes because I'm sat in rubble. You know, like I don't have any walls. You've all gone home to walls and running water. And look, I'm in the Blitz. Like, this is what's happened. And then over time, the walls start building back up again, and this starts being more functional, and you learn stuff, and you learn who people are, and you get back to, it's not the same. My house does not look the same. Like, I think you would look at the terrace and be like, oh, that's a slightly odd shaped slanty wall that you clearly didn't know how to build properly, but it's a house and it's all right.
And you get stronger, the kids get stronger, and you learn to live a different life.
I can't imagine what my life would be like with him in it now. So much has happened that I almost can't imagine. And in some ways that's really sad, but in some ways it means that we've done all right. We are who we are, and we're a family, and it's different and it's slightly bizarre and fairly chaotic, but there's love and there's healthy, happy relationships. And actually, that's what I want for my kids, is to be in a house where there's love and healthy, happy relationships. And we can still do that. It's not ideal. They will be marked by it, but everything doesn't have to be ruined. And
we use the phrase, it is a terrible thing that happened to you, but it does not define you. And I think that is something that I want the children to believe going forward, that they are still going to live, I hope, wonderful, exciting, fabulous lives in spite of this horrible thing that happened to them when they were children. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. It sounds like you are absolutely smashing widowhood. So insofar as any of us are, and insofar as any of us have a clue what we're doing, you talk about it, there's no manual, is there? And I like to think that one day these podcast episodes may form a sort of guide to people who are struggling, because they are difficult to listen to and they are hard, but they do give you a like a beacon of hope at the end, that you keep ploughing forward, and at some point things will get bearable again.
Talking about it is so important, and yeah, it's been great to be here.
Well, thank you ever so much. I dare say we will stay in touch, and lots of love to you, children, and I wish you every happiness, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
Bye.
Thank you for listening today. We'll be back with you soon for more from the front line of loss.
But for now, as you were.